I'm just gonna let you guys know right now, this is not water. But hi, how's it going? My name is Kylie. If this is your first time here, welcome to the channel. I'm so glad to have you. Today, as you saw by the title, I'm going to be ranking the top 30 scariest villains in horror movies of all time. This is also just my personal list of the villains that scare me the most. This list also will include some creatures, so bear that in mind. I know this list might not technically be full of villains per se, but it's my list, okay? And even though initially this was supposed to be a top 10 list, and then I was like, oh wait, no, maybe it should be 20 because there's kind of a lot. As things kept progressing and I kept thinking about it and building onto my list, I was like, okay, this has to be a top 25. Then I announced it on my community tab, and then after that, I came up with 10 more. So yes, this is a list of the top 30 horror villains of all time, but I still have 5 honorable mentions. Some of you guys said that I should just trim it down to a top 10 list, but then even if I did that, I still would have probably mentioned all of these as honorable mentions. So I was like, you know what? It'll be more fun if I just rank them all. So I ranked 30 of the scariest horror movie villains in my opinion, and then the 5 that are honorable mentions, I didn't really rank them. So I'll just list those off right now. We have the OG Leatherface, so Leatherface from 1974. No, he didn't make my top 30. Ooh. Then we have the Hitchhiker from Texas Chainsaw Massacre as well. Wanted to include him. I kind of feel like he needs more recognition as a villain because I found him to be more terrifying than Leatherface, honestly. Like, yeah, Leatherface has the chainsaw, but the Hitchhiker, like, cut himself and then cut someone in the car, which I think just on a psychological level is a little bit more scary than someone that is more overtly brute and terrifying like Leatherface. You'll see that kind of as a theme. I'm more scared of psychological things, so anyways. Another honorable mention is Jason Voorhees. Yes, Jason Voorhees did not make my top 30, but here is why. Honestly, just kind of the lack of creativity, the lack of a psychological component that Jason brings, he just doesn't do it for me. I like watching the Friday the 13th movies because they're just a lot of fun. Like, I don't find them scary in the slightest. Same goes for a lot of classic horror. I watch it mainly just for fun because none of those movies really scare me, mainly just because like a lot of them are very dated. But yeah, sorry, I don't find Jason Voorhees to be scary. He's like the most extremely basic concept of a villain, I feel like. Just big, brute, machete, stab. I respect him, but Jason is basic. Oh, definitely should be pointed out, these are not necessarily ranked on how scary they would be in real life. I do take the concept into account, but I'm more talking about scary in terms of when I watch the movie, do I feel scared? So obviously in concept, if I was standing in front of Jason, I would be terrified because he's a giant brute and I am a tiny, skinny little twig. He would kill me with ease. So I don't really mean this in a practical sense. I'm ranking these really just on how scared the movie makes me feel and how scary the villain is. But concept is still taken into account with some of them. Okay, next honorable mention is the clown from Poltergeist. Listen, I feel like it's kind of a common thing that the clown from Poltergeist is well known to be very terrifying, and I know he's not technically a villain, but again, this is my list, and even if it's not technically a character, I think he still is one of the most terrifying horror movie characters of all time. There is so much energy in that clown, it's very hard to explain, but honestly, it's not, because that clown is just sort of unspeakably terrifying. So I mean, yeah, I don't really need to justify myself with that one. A lot of people find that clown scary. And the last honorable mention would be the man who can't breathe in Insidious 3. Now, when I watch that movie, I feel so terrified. He honestly would have been higher up on my list just because of kind of his aura, his look, everything about it terrifies me. Here's where the concept kind of comes into play, because with him, you can just kind of rip off his oxygen mask and a lot of his power is stripped away. He's kind of a very weak, what do they call him? He's really kind of a weak ghost. Is he a ghost? I can't remember if he was technically a demon or not. Either way, when I watch the movie, yes, I feel terrified, but knowing how weak he truly is though, nah, it doesn't really do it for me. So I know I said that this ranking is based on how scared I feel when I watch the movie, and I do feel terrified for most of the movie, but once you kind of learn that that is his major weakness, it's really easy to exploit that weakness. He's just not as scary anymore. Okay, now we are getting into my top 30 list. That feels so ridiculous to say, but honestly, I could not make this list any shorter. All of these villains deserve to be talked about. And my number 30... I need more drink. Hold on. Ooh. Oh yeah. I sure do like my sparkling water. Okay, my number 30 is Vilmer from Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation. This is a horror movie that I feel like is one that time forgot. I know how bad it is, but honestly, just watch my review of it because I kind of have conflicting feelings on the movie. It's really, really bad. But Matthew McConaughey's performance as Vilmer is truly breathtaking. I think he's genuinely very scary. I think he pulls off this very kind of deranged character super well, and I was scared of him, but I was also attracted to him. I mean, the first time that you ever see him on screen, he's snapping somebody's neck. It's a very intense scene, and he carries this absolutely chaotic energy throughout the film. I think that's terrifying. Anyways, I know a lot of people won't agree with me on that, so moving on to number 29, and that would be Annie Wilkes from Misery. Now, there is no denying that Kathy Bates' performance was incredible. However, with Kathy Bates and like her stature, she's a very small woman. I just don't personally feel that frightened of her. Yes, it is a frightening situation. If I was in that position with my legs broken and she was just this mad woman that was an uber fan of me, would definitely be terrified. But with all of the other villains I'm going to talk about today, I kind of feel like she belongs towards the bottom. Because with her, there's kind of the psychological torture of him being in so much pain and she's just sort of holding him hostage. And yes, it does get a visceral reaction thinking of my body being broken and her being in control of that, but Annie Wilkes herself just doesn't really scare me that much. Okay, so I just finished reading Misery for the first time. I had never read the book before. I'd only seen the movie one time, and after reading the book Annie would probably most definitely make my top 10, maybe my top 5. Book Annie was so scary. She was a lot larger in stature, and the things she did to Paul were, I feel like, a lot worse than what she did in the movie. The movie really took it easy with some of the stuff that she did to him. So I feel a little bit differently about her placement on this list now, but I mean, at the end of the day, Book Annie is a lot more frightening, so I don't know. I don't know what to do. She's gonna stay at number 29. So, you know, still, credit where credit is due. It's just the rest of these villains I find a lot more terrifying than her. Up next at number 28, and that would actually go to Chucky. Now, in most of the films, I don't feel scared of him because it is such an ironic and hilarious concept, the fact that this little doll is running around killing people. But here's the thing. I specifically say Chucky in Child's Play 2 because there were some scenes in that movie, like the classroom scene, where I actually had to look away from the screen. The only time that I have been that terrified of a movie is the last time that I watched The Invisible Man. I rarely have to look away from the screen because I'm so desensitized now, and the fact that that movie came out in like 1990? No. Was it 89? I don't know. Whatever. It came out like 30 years ago and it still elicited that response from me. I just think that in Child's Play 2, they actually utilized all the ways in which a tiny doll would actually have an advantage against a full-sized human. Because a lot of people laugh and they're like, well, I would just kick that doll across the room. And that's fair. But in Child's Play 2, he was hiding in closets, he was hiding under beds, actually utilizing his size to his advantage. And so for that reason, it actually was scary to me. Plus, I have to mention whenever I talk about him, his Stitch look from Bride of Chucky in particular is what haunted me as a child. I never saw a Child's Play movie until I was like 21 years old, but that face, that little stitched face haunted me. Oh, all throughout childhood, I was so terrified of Chucky. But anyways, moving on to number 27, who is yet another very iconic figure, don't be mad. My number 27 goes to Michael Myers. Just please hear me out, okay? When it comes to the concept, yes, love Michael to death. However, the only time that I have felt scared of Michael is the opening scene of the original and the 2018 sequel. And that was just when I was in theaters. When I rewatched the movie, I didn't have any fear at all. I just was enjoying Michael being Michael. And it's kind of a similar thing to Jason, where Michael is just very basic. They're very basic slasher movies. You know what to expect. I find more fear in the unexpected. So like Michael in concept, I love the idea of the boogeyman, the fact that he really has no mind and no soul and he's just this empty killing vessel. Love that to death. However, the movies just like don't really do it for me. I feel like when I see Halloween Kills in the theater, I will still have that fear. Obviously because I'll be unfamiliar with the movie, I won't know what's coming next, and so the tension and everything will work for me, and also because I care about a good amount of the characters in those films. But other than that, and on a rewatch and stuff, I just never find Michael scary. Whereas with a lot of these other villains on my list that made it higher up, it doesn't really matter how many times I watch the film because they just terrify me to the core of my soul. But we won't get there until I get to about probably my top 10, honestly. Although the next one, I don't know, the next one does tend to scare me every time I watch the film. So number 26, and that is, it is the Velociraptors from Jurassic Park. Yes, the T-Rex is terrifying. The Velociraptors, the kitchen scene. It's the kitchen scene. I think it's just the fact that the Velociraptors are almost human-sized. They're obviously quite a bit bigger, but I mean just height-wise and whatever, they can fit into places humans can also fit. And they're also highly intelligent. I think that's what's so terrifying because T-Rexes, yes, huge, massive mouth, but they got a little pea-sized brain in there. There's not much going on. So for me, it's the Velociraptors. I'm back and forth with how I feel with what they did in Jurassic World, where they kind of made the Velociraptors more like heroes. The Velociraptors had essentially been domesticated and stuff in Jurassic World, which I don't know. I like it, but I also don't like it. I think just the Velociraptors in Jurassic Park are incredible. Terrifying to me, and honestly, I haven't watched Jurassic Park in a couple of years at this point, which is a shame because it's one of my favorite movies. But those Velociraptors honestly do have some character energy, and they just feel so evil. Anyways, moving on to my number 25. I implore you to remember that this is my list because my number 25 is Esther from Orphan. I recently watched this movie for the first time. I'm going to be talking about it in my April wrap-up part 2, but this character. I'm not going to give anything away about the plot, don't worry. It's just the fact that this character is so deceitful, and also the fact that it's packaged in a child's body. For that very reason, she can be so incredibly manipulative, and I think just on a psychological level, that's so terrifying, because obviously people aren't going to want to believe that a little child is doing all of these vile, atrocious things, but she is. And that's one of the most frustrating things that I feel like can happen to a character that you like in a movie, where you know the truth and they know the truth and they're trying to get everyone else to know the truth, but no one's believing them. And it is with good reason because, like I said, who would believe that a child is doing all these atrocious things? So that's why I find Esther to be so terrifying. Gonna move on now to my number 24, which would be The Thing. Now, honestly, I'm not really scared of the practical effects in that movie. Yes, they are some of the best that I've ever seen, but I honestly just, when I look at it, I just think that they're awesome. I don't really look at it and get scared, to be honest. However, the thing that scares me, of course, yet again, is the psychological component of the fact that the thing could be any one of these people. The fact that it could look and walk and talk like someone that you think you're really close to. That's what's scary about The Thing to me and why I think it is such an excellent film. But some of those visuals, though, I mean, they are very, very gross and scary, and yes, if I was seeing it in person, I would be terrified, but being that they're very easy to recognize as practical effects, I just kind of admire the art. It doesn't really scare me in that way. But on a psychological level, oh yes. Moving on to my number 23, and that would go to The Woman in Black. This movie, I think after rewatching it several times, it does become a little bit less scary. However, the atmosphere of the film really does kind of send a chill through my bones, and the fact that the Woman in Black is this entity entity that specifically targets children. So maybe I don't find her to be as scary, but I do find the deaths in the film to be so just tragic and off-putting because most of them are children. But even if the deaths are more scary than the woman in black herself, I think it is just still such a beautifully haunting film. Gorgeous, gorgeous location, and a stellar performance by Daniel Radcliffe. I wish he would come back to horror, honestly. That man does have range. But anyways, moving on to my number 22, which would be The Aliens from Dark Skies. Now, you actually don't even really see these aliens, I don't think, at all in this movie. If you do, it's very, very brief. I can't remember right now. But I'm one of those people where I get more scared of the things that you can't see. I've talked about this before. It's kind of just like an anxious person thing, I think. When you have an anxious brain, you kind of tend to think of every possible scenario in any given situation. So when you don't have enough information, when you don't know the size of these beings, you don't know what they look like, what their strengths/weaknesses could be, kind of sends you into a spiral, because when you're trying to envision all the possible outcomes of the future, you just can't. So I love when you can't really see the assailant, and that's what happens in Dark Skies. But the pain and the weird things that they do to this family are, oh my gosh, it's so good. Love that movie. Try to promote it whenever I can. I think the scariest thing about them is probably how they make first contact through the children. That's inherently just scarier because with children, they have so much more life left to live. So the stakes are just sort of inherently raised. And I don't want to give too much away if you haven't seen the film, because I think it's so worth seeing, and kind of how the plot unravels and the things that you learn about these aliens is so good, so I won't give too much away, but just watch that movie if you never have. I'm gonna move on now to number 21, which would be Diana Walter from Lights Out. This is a movie that no matter how many times I watch it, I still get scared, because in concept, okay, maybe this is a me thing, but I had a crippling fear of the dark as a child. I had to sleep with my closet light on for, I don't even know, I'd leave it on for the entire night, and that went on for probably like a year straight. Like, I mean crippling fear of the dark, okay? So when this movie comes out and I see the trailers and everything like that, I was like, oh boy, we have a spirit that only really shows up in the dark. If you have your light on, you're safe. And I think just conceptually, that's incredible. That might be more of a me thing just because of my fear of the dark and everything, but that movie never fails to scare me. I think Diana Walter, that is just a great concept. She's a great villain. She's also very dynamic. She's a very complex character almost. So that just adds layers to her, and I love Diana. Up next, at number 20, may be shocking to some of you, but that would be Samara from The Ring. The reason why she's only number 20 for me is because there is such a degree of humanity to Samara. She's this little girl that had been done so wrong in her life, and yeah, you know, something was definitely wrong with her, and this little child kind of was the embodiment of some sort of sinister force, but at the same time you can kind of connect with her on a humanity level, so that's why she's not higher up on my list. But the fact that you have to keep sharing the tape, the fact that she will really never stop, I think that is why she has made her place at least on my top 20. Moving on now to number 19, and I'm kind of surprised this didn't make it higher up on my list, but that would be the alien from Alien in 1979. Love this movie to death. I mean, the reasons why this alien are terrifying should be pretty obvious. Hopefully I can kind of talk about these plot points because the movie is so old and iconic, which the fact that it lays an egg inside of a living human host and then proceeds to burst forth from the human and run off. It's a bit much to process. And not only that, but it grows insanely quickly. It's much like an eel where it has this second set of jaws where it can just not only that, but it's also giant and has acidic blood. So even if they want to wound this thing, its blood could drip through the ship, thereby possibly destroying the ship and sucking everything out into space. That's insane, and it's like they say in the movie, it's damn near like a perfect predator. Now, the reason why it's all the way down at number 19 is because I just feel like I would survive in that situation. I talked about this in my Would You Survive These Horror Movie videos last week, and I think I'm crafty enough to have been the final girl in that situation. I'm not the weapons type, I'm not the combative type, I'm more of a hide and be in the right place at the right time type. And using my mind as my weapon, that's my thing. So anyways, I already talked about all of that, I'm just gonna move on. My number 18 goes to Freddy Krueger, but Freddy Krueger from the remake. I said what I said. Here's the thing, I have to explain myself yet again. I watch a lot of classic horror movies because I find them to be really fun. I don't really find many of them to be scary. One exception would be Jaws, and like I said, the opening scene of Halloween. Poltergeist used to scare me. I don't think it would anymore. I just grew up watching that movie, so obviously as a child it scared me, but now not really. I would be so hard pressed to think of a classic film that actually scares me. Freddy Krueger really does not do it for me. I really like the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie. I love Dream Master, which I feel like is such an underrated one in the franchise, mainly because the practical effects are the best in that movie, I think, out of the entire franchise. But in terms of being scary, Robert Englund does not do it for me. There are a lot of people that kind of take offense to that, and it's not that I don't have respect for Robert Englund because I love him as Freddy. It's just that Jackie Earle Haley brought this kind of raw, just very raw, evil kind of presence to the character. There's also the added fact that they made him a Peter-phile, if you catch my drift. And that's awful. I don't necessarily agree with that choice, but I have to admit it does make him a lot scarier to me. Also, his voice, I feel like there was just a lot less of a comedic presence with Jackie Earle Haley. No, I don't love his look. I've said many times he looks like a naked mole rat, but his sort of cadence, the very, very deep, gravelly nature of his voice, that's just more effective for me. And honestly, I find him to be so much scarier than the original Freddy. I know whenever I say that, I open myself up to so much criticism, but let me just speak my truth, okay? Anyways, gonna move on now. Oh my gosh, we're only at number 17. We're almost halfway done, folks. And at number 17, that would be the zombies from The Crazies. The reason why these made it a little bit higher than a lot of the other iconic characters on this list is because even though they are zombies, there is still just an inkling of the person they used to be inside of them. Because technically this isn't really a zombie movie. I mean, like, that's basically what it is, but technically it's not quite a zombie movie. Because the people that become infected are just that. They are still themselves, they are just very, very sick. So for me, I don't know why that's scarier, because if there's something that you can't reason with, at least, like, you know that. So you know that reasoning with them and stuff is not really a line of defense. But with the Crazies, there is still just that tiny little ounce of humanity left in them. There is still just that tiny little light of cognitive reasoning there. So there is this really small chance that if you play your cards just right, you might get out of a really tricky situation with them. And so again, that's kind of more of a psychological thing, and I think why I find them to be so scary. So that is why for me, that even though I've seen this movie probably 5 or 6 times, I still get scared of it every single time. It's an amazing movie. I know it's a remake. If you haven't seen it yet, please do. Up next, at number 16, that would be Valak from The Conjuring 2. And I guess that demon is also in The Nun, right? I can't remember if it makes an appearance in any of the other movies. I don't think it does. In The Nun, Valak is very weak, but in The Conjuring 2, I think that it is incredible. Now, the moments that I find Valak scary are not the super kind of over-the-top climactic moments with her. The moments that I find her to be the most terrifying are more so when she is very shrouded, when she's in the shadows, when she's kind of toying with our protagonist's minds and sort of showing up, but really she's just making her presence known. And it's weird too, because I don't really find demons to be scary. I don't really believe in demons, I mean in real life, but in movies they are just presented in such a way that I find demons to be so terrifying, because they don't operate with the same rules as humans do. They don't operate with the same rules as creatures do either. They do whatever they want, and oftentimes they can be so just ever present, and they kind of just create this atmosphere of dread that lingers for like the entire movie, whereas sometimes with creature features you get a break every now and then, but with movies involving demons I don't really feel like you always get that. So yeah, Valak is a scary one. Up next at number 15, that would go to Leatherface, but from the 2003 remake. Now the reason why he made it up here and the original Leatherface didn't is because I just feel like in the remake, he is so much more brute. In the original, he seemed a lot more like a tortured soul that was just really manipulated by his family. Whereas in the remake, I feel like he's a lot more self-aware. He knows what he's doing and he enjoys inflicting pain. And there's also the fact that the remake is a lot more gory, it's a lot more intense, and so that probably is a factor. But nonetheless, also in the remake, I believe he's played by an actor that is about 6'5", so he's also giant. He is a huge menace with a chainsaw, so it feels earned that he made number 15. Number 14 is from one of my favorite horror movies of all time, and that would be Vincent from the House of Wax remake from 2005. This movie gets too much hate. I mean, a lot of people say that they love it because it's so bad that it's good. I just think it's good. Yes, it stars Paris Hilton. Yes, there are some parts of the movie that don't really work and are really cheesy, but I absolutely love it because of that. And most of the movie is genuinely terrifying. I think some of the gore is so unique and original and so gets under my skin. A lot of my subs know on this channel I don't do well with gore, and the same can be said for this movie. I just think it's so unique and it's so good in this movie that I have to give it a pass. Vincent also in a way kind of reminds me of Leatherface because he is also manipulated by his family, kind of just carrying on this tradition, but he is also a very big brute force. And the reason why he makes it higher up on this list is because of what he does to you. At least in the original from 1953, where Vincent Price's oh my god, did I just put that together? The original movie from 1953, which is one of my favorites by the way, it stars Vincent Price, and so did they name the antagonist of the remake Vincent in honor of Vincent Price? I'm gonna look that up later. I just can't believe I just put that together. Anyways, but unlike the original, he does not wait until you're dead. He coats your body in boiling hot wax while you're alive. That to me, I can't imagine a worse death than that. I just feel like I would be so hard pressed to find a worse way to go. Because burning alive, boiling alive, etc. is one of the most painful ways to die. Contrary to popular belief, because actually when you get burned alive, the sensation goes all the way up your nerves. So they're getting burned all the way up to the bone, you're feeling it the whole time. So to get coated in boiling hot wax, yeah, no, not for me. Anyways, I need to move on. I'm feeling a little bit talkative, if you know what I mean. My number 13 has to go to Art the Clown. Art the Clown made it higher up on my list than I thought he would, honestly. But the more I thought about it, even though Terrifier is such a cheesy flick, Art the Clown is kind of in a league of his own in terms of slashers. He has a very distinct energy. It's really hard for me to explain, but he radiates so much character energy while also remaining so incredibly mysterious. I think for that reason, that's why he's so scary to me, and also the fact that he is just so insanely brutal. The gore in Terrifier really is a lot to handle, but it's very effective and I think very unique, and just the brutality of Art also terrifies me. Oops, I finished my drink. And also I think his look is very weird and very creepy, and also the fact that he seems maybe a little bit sexually motivated, that makes me feel very defensive. I don't know about you. Anyways, moving on to number 12, we're almost to the top 10, but at number 12 comes The Tethered from Us. Now the reason why The Tethered are so scary to me, not only because they are so brutal in their willingness to replace their counterparts, but because they have such a good motivation. At the end of the day, the Tethered are human beings. They just don't have a soul, but the definition of a soul and how that contributes to your humanity, that is all somewhat of a gray area. So at the end of the day, the Tethered still are human beings. They really truly have every right to want to live on the surface as everybody else does. But obviously to do so, I don't think that the world would work if the population of the United States doubled, so I fully understand their motivation in trying to eliminate their counterpart. And for whatever reason, I know that a lot of times a villain is more scary when you don't understand their motivation, but kind of the opposite is true with the Tethered, because it's scary because you almost empathize with them. Almost. And also home invasions are terrifying. I think this was a wonderfully unique kind of twist on that subgenre, and it is really hard to pinpoint exactly what it is that's so scary about having a doppelganger. Maybe it kind of comes down to narcissism and just the desire of being one of a kind. I don't know. This is one of the ones where I can't fully explain why it's so high up on my list, but it just is. Moving on to my number 11, and this man. Okay. I'm really surprised he didn't make my top 10 because I thought he would have earned that. There were just more villains that I found scarier than him somehow, but that would be Jigsaw, also known as John Kramer. Here I think is where we're starting to get into a lot more of the psychologically based villains, because John himself is not really scary, but what he is capable of because of the way he's able to kind of manipulate his disciples, if you will, is terrifying. I've mentioned many times on my channel that I do not do well with body horror, so the Saw movies are very effective for me. To think of being in that situation, whether or not John was actually the one to physically put me into a trap, he was still the one more or less orchestrating the entire thing. So to have that power, not only to think of these deadly traps, but to also be able to manipulate other human beings into kidnapping people and putting them into the traps, I just can't even really, I can't wrap my mind around that. And so again, this is one that just more so in concept, if I were to think of myself in these situations, I couldn't really imagine myself in these situations because you know what? I don't want to. I think it's kind of self-explanatory with the self-mutilation and things that these characters go through, the kind of psychological trauma as well. I want no part of it. And that's why Jigsaw John Kramer scares me so much. Oh my gosh, we are finally to my top 10. My top 10 scariest horror movie villains of all time. Coming in at number 10, and that would be Rose Armitage from Get Out. Now you might be wondering how she found herself higher up on this list than John Kramer, but I'll tell you why. At least John Kramer never really pretended to be something that he was not. As a man dying of cancer, he just kind of put all his cards out on the table and he was what he was. Rose had the ability to act like a fully neurotypical human being, pretending to fall in love with black men, so that she could lure them back to her family home, hypnotize them into the sunken place, and let some other old white person overtake their body. You have to be pure evil to do something like that. And also the racially driven motivations too are just like, I can't even get into that, it's too much. But the one standout scene that really comes to mind is when she is sitting on her bed and she's sipping her little milk from a straw, like, and she's plucking her little dry cereal and eating the cereal with the milk separate. I don't know why, but that's so weird. So it's all these little quirks and everything that just make her so off and make her so inhuman. And that is why personally to me she is just so horrifying, because it also kind of speaks to relationships where you feel like you really know a person and you feel like you're really in love with this person and this person is in love with you, and yet there can still be this insane level of betrayal. So there are just so many layers as to why Rose is so terrifying. She honestly maybe could have made it higher up on my list, but we have some other really good villains to talk about. So moving on to number 9. Number 9 would go to Kevin Wendell Crumb from Split. This one feels pretty much self-explanatory because if you've seen the movie, you know what the Beast is, and you also know what a lot of his other personalities are capable of. I think it's really just the cannibalism that gets to me personally, and also just the concept of the Beast and kind of the entire third act of this film. But also at the end of the day, being kidnapped in general is terrifying. So throughout the whole film, it doesn't really matter what personality he is because you just know what he's capable of no matter what personality is inhabiting him. And James McAvoy's performance, that man deserves everything. I wish that it hadn't been so sullied with Glass because that was such an anticlimactic sequel. I really didn't like Glass. But anyways, at least we have Split, and I think he kind of speaks for himself as such a terrifying villain. Although I will say one more thing, I think the fact that he is so dynamic with so many different personalities and stuff also makes him a lot more interesting, and on a psychological level it makes you feel a bit more confused about the character. But anyways, moving on. My number 8 would go to the red-faced demon from Insidious. Now, honestly, like I said, demons don't typically scare me that much, and I don't know what it is about them in movies that just does it for me. You know what it is though, I think? Maybe it's not so much the Red Demon itself. Maybe it is his soundtrack. I don't have the words to express how off-put I feel when I listen to Tiny Tim sing. I'm glad his music exists specifically for the Insidious franchise, but it really puts me in a bad place. I think honestly the music elevates the Red Demon so much. There was also that one jump scare in Insidious that hopefully we all know. The first time I saw this movie, the Red Demon spoke to me in such a way. I was so terrified. I'm still so scared of Insidious. Every time I rewatch those movies, I'm still scared somehow. It's so hard to pinpoint what it is. I just think that the atmosphere and kind of the motivations of the demon especially are probably why it's so scary. Again, when you add kids into the equation, it just makes it all the more scary. I'm gonna move on now. This video is gonna be so long. But anyways, moving on to my number 7, which would be the creature from It Follows. This is one that I've talked about a couple of times despite me never reviewing It Follows on this channel. Again, here we go with the concept, but also every time that I watch this movie, I feel terrified. But really, it's just the fact that there is really not much that can be done about this enigmatic creature. It will always come after you. It will always come at you in very different forms. I think that might be why, because its ability to camouflage and appear maybe as your friend or just any random stranger on the street is why I feel so scared of it. And the way that it's so vicious too. I think it's sort of just the deliberate and unreasonable nature of the creature. You can never get it to stop coming after you, and that's probably why it gets to me so much. Moving on now to my number 6, and that would go to the Bride in Black from Insidious 2. It is also a little bit in Insidious 1, but it's more heavily featured in Insidious 2. Insidious 2 is probably my favorite of the whole franchise. I know most people prefer the first one. I just love the continuation of the story in the second one, and also literally because of Parker Crane and his mother. I don't want to give too much away, but the Bride in Black is so horrifying to me. I love the whole backstory. I love the way that the story is continued from the first movie. I love the sort of ghost hunters, ghost adventures type of vibe that the second movie takes, because they go out and kind of discover this whole backstory. And also something about the fact that the Bride in Black is kind of this guise, this killing mask for Parker Crane. I just love that. I guess maybe the Bride in Black is also kind of on par with Parker Crane's mother. I think her name was like Michelle or something. She will forever scare me. I don't think it really matters how many times I watch that movie because the Insidious movies are always scary to me. And I'll sound like a broken record, but like demons and ghosts in real life don't scare me, so I can't quite pinpoint what it is about these films. But I feel hard pressed to find many other films that give me the sort of sense of existential dread that the first two Insidious movies do. So anyways, moving on to number 5, which would be The Monsters from A Quiet Place. Now, I talked about this movie recently as well, definitely watch my video from last Monday, but I think this kind of goes without saying, the fact that you have to be uber silent, that you can't really make a single noise or else you will definitely die. That is not only viscerally, but also psychologically kind of traumatizing. They're also so weird looking. Everything about them kind of reminds me of Alien a little bit, the way that they are almost a perfect predator, because not only is it so hard to be quiet as a human being, but also the fact that if you are not the most silent you could possibly be, these creatures will rip into you in a matter of like 2 seconds. I think that really is what it is, because it's not like they are completely indestructible or anything. They kind of just prey mostly on our own weaknesses, and it's a weakness that we don't really think about, but every movement that we make is kind of noisy. Humans are kind of loud. So I love them. I love The Monsters from A Quiet Place. Easily earned their spot at number 5. Moving on to number 4. Again, I'm a little bit surprised that it didn't make its place higher up on my list, but I do have good reason. And at number 4 would be Pennywise, specifically from It 2017. Tim Curry Pennywise, I have no fear of. He didn't even make my top 35. Just really doesn't do it for me. But Pennywise from It 2017 and 2019. Wow. The reason why he's not in my top 3 or higher up or not at my number 1 is because when he torments you, there is always going to be a part of you that knows it's not real. At least that would be the case for me. And that is kind of a huge fault. Like, yes, he can make you see your worst fears, and yes, Pennywise himself is horrifying, but none of what he's showing you is actually real. Only he himself can kind of physically harm you, but whatever other visions he makes and such, they're just not real. And I feel like I would be able to use my rationale and I would be able to use that as a defense, but that is the only reason why he is not probably number 1 on my list. Speaking of though, we are getting close because now we are entering my top 3 scariest horror movie villains of all time. At number 3, that would have to go to Hannibal Lecter. Now, I put both images up on screen because Anthony Hopkins' performance, yes, it is unmatched, but so is Mads Mikkelsen's. I think with Mads Mikkelsen in particular, he is a very handsome man. So that being said, there is the psychological component of people that are more attractive, just feeling more trustworthy. So in that sense, he is able to manipulate you so easily, and even Anthony Hopkins' Hannibal Lecter has the ability to just manipulate people to no end. Particularly in this show though, the way that Mads Mikkelsen's Hannibal Lecter can manipulate characters to seemingly no end, to do things that you would never ever expect from them, I find to be so horrifying. And here we are again with the psychological component. You would be very hard pressed to find another character as psychologically enchanting as Hannibal Lecter. And that's just personally what scares me more. Like, what could somebody do to my mind? That being said though, my number 2 is actually not so much of a psychological choice, but that would be Calvin from Life. Calvin gives me a lot of Alien 1979 vibes. It has so many of the attributes of that original Alien, but it can do so much more. Because this alien, it might not have acidic blood, but it can morph and fit through any type of crook and cranny. So it can travel through the ship and you would never know where it is. But not only that, it can survive in the vacuum of space. To me, that feels as about indestructible as a monster could possibly come. For that reason especially, and the fact that it can just move around and you don't necessarily know what it is, that and the fact that it survives off of other organic matter, so obviously it targets humans. And another thing it has in common with Alien from 1979 is it has no remorse. There's not really an inkling of sentience besides the fact that it is unbelievably smart. There is just no emotion there at all. So it kind of combines a lot of the things from a lot of my other favorite villains. The soullessness of Michael Myers, the kind of indestructibility and perfect predatory nature that Alien has, its sort of ever-presence, the way it travels through the ship, you never know where it is, that's kind of similar to like a ghost or a demon, and the fact that it targets humans, which is just kind of similar to like a lot of villains obviously. It just has so much going for it in the way of it being utterly terrifying. I also feel like that is definitely an underrated movie. Not enough people watch it or talk about it, so if you haven't seen Life, please watch it. Okay, it is time. Coming in at my number 1 scariest horror movie villain of all time, and that would be Adrian from The Invisible Man. I have a lot of reasons, but I feel like I want to keep this brief because you understand my logic and my reasoning at this point. The reason why being, despite maybe equally as manipulative as Hannibal Lecter, but making it higher up on my list is this. We were following the main character that was in a deeply committed relationship to him. At least with Hannibal Lecter, there is kind of always that separation, at least of the glass. We see that in Silence of the Lambs. In the TV show, yes, that is different and they kind of play around with relationships with him, but with Adrian, we are following this relationship that is so horrifyingly abusive. And for that reason, this movie feels just so realistic. And I know that that kind of fiber optics technology or whatever it was doesn't necessarily exist yet, but that technology doesn't necessarily feel that far out of arm's reach. Technology is expanding and growing every single day. Our phones even have like 4 or 5 cameras on them these days. Basically what I'm saying is it really just doesn't take much for me to suspend my disbelief with the Invisible Man. I can just very easily envision myself in that situation. And that's why no matter how many times I watch that film, I am still scared every single time that I watch it. And honestly, I have nightmares every single time that I watch that film. And also, of course, it is because of the brilliance of the filmmaking, the brilliance of Leigh Whannell, the use of silence, the cinematography, and of course the acting performances. Without all that, I probably wouldn't feel the same way. But regardless, I do think it's fair that he comes in at number 1. I think he is the most frightening horror movie villain of all time. It's really honestly just because of the realism, because like with a lot of these other monsters and demons and stuff, that is not grounded in reality. And even with Hannibal Lecter, I mean, he's a cannibal and we don't know too many cannibals, do we? Whereas with Adrian, I feel like a lot of us have either experienced or we know a friend that has been in such an abusive relationship. Obviously not to that extent, but we know that that is out there. And that's why I think it's so brilliant, because it really played on that realistic fear that a lot of us probably have, especially as women. So that does it. Thank you for bearing with me. Thank you for sticking it out to the end of the video if you made it here. And if you did and you're not subscribed yet, I would definitely urge you to click that button. Also click the like, it really helps me out. Comment down below for engagement. I would love to know your guys' top 10 or your favorite villain, anything like that. And definitely let me know which ones that I missed, because I know that I must have missed at least a couple. Yeah, I'm just about finishing editing right now and I cannot believe that I forgot Bagul. I feel so stupid. I think he definitely would have made top 10. But if you'd like to follow me on social media or follow my Patreon or my vlog channel where there is a bunch of bonus content, that is all linked down below. I hope that you enjoyed this video and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!